dobrodošli na još jedno predavanje IEEE 115 odjela za obrazovanje. Danas je sa nama profesor Branimir Pejčinović. Predavanje će biti na engleskom jeziku i bavit ćemo se sa Scrumom, odnosno sa Scrumom u inženjerskom obrazovanju.
Aha.
Profesor Pejčinović, prepuštam riječ vama.
Dobro, hvala. Juraj. Gdje sad ovo? Sad imam malo samo. Idem. Pa evo, prije nego što sam došao, prije nego što pređemo na engleski, budemo malo na hrvatskom, jer su mi poslali pitanja na hrvatskom. Predragi kompanija kao Brano, ali možeš odgovoriti na to što je to Scrum? Je li to neka prolazna metoda, to bi na engleski rekli fad, ili tek sada se dobiva na značaju, postoje neke druge slične metode, o tome ćemo govoriti sve te stvari. Koji su koristi, zašto bi to bilo tko pokušava se time baviti, što se može, ne može postići, to će implicite biti jasno iz ovoga što ću pričati. Za koje metode nastaje primjenjiv? Pa iz jednostavnog razloga što je to za timski rad, neće biti za nekakve standardne ispite i tako, nego više za projekte koje možda imate sa studentima. Ima li primjera kako se to primjenjuje u nastavi? Da, ali ne toliko u ovim hardcore inženjerskim programima, više software engineering. Ne više, nego praktično ekskluzivno to tamo koriste i to sa vrlo dobrim uspjehom. I koji su onda preduvjeti za primjenu, to je sad malo teže i to ćemo o tome možda razgovarati na kraju. So, switching to English. Do we have anybody on YouTube? Do we have anybody on YouTube?
Yeah.
Maybe one.
4.
Oh, excellent. So, first question, this is for you. This is not a rhetorical question. How do you start your projects? So I'll pick on people I know. So, Tvrtko.
I grab big white paper and then start to brainstorm.
Brainstorm. Put on some ideas. What do you think is going to be needed? How? What are the top priorities? What are the things that, are critical, for the success? But once you get started, what do you use to manage a project? So this is, maybe you're right.
I guess we use wikis a lot.
Uh-huh. So, you put all those things on wikis, maybe some deadlines,
Yeah.
and you say, okay, this is person responsible for that, and da-da-da, okay? So, and last thing is, what is your biggest problem with teamwork? And I'm trying to pick on somebody else. Viktore, može i na hrvatsko. What is the biggest problem? If you have teams that work, teams of students.
Što je najveći problem? Na neki način nagovoriti studente da sudjeluju u timu i da svojim radom doprinose radu timu.
So how do we make team work? In other words, so it doesn't become one or maybe 2 out of 4 or 5 people who do all the work and then everybody takes a vacation, right? Everybody else, okay? That's also called social loafing. In other words, not everybody does what they're supposed to. So that is one of the biggest problems. And, I'll try to tell you why maybe Scrum or Agile in general might be able to help with that. So what we'll talk a little bit about is what and why. Now, you have to understand this is very simplified presentation. I'm not an expert in project management. I'm really just kind of learning as I go. I'll try to explain why Scrum is, I think, promising method here. Why Scrum in particular in engineering education. Like I said, people use this in software engineering and actually very successfully. And nuts and bolts, how do we actually do it? The question that was posed in those questions at the beginning was, does this stuff actually work? That was the implication. And we'll talk a little bit at the end, some conclusions and maybe some questions. So there are, in principle, there are whole master's degrees you can get in project management. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend that I actually have a master's degree. My wife does. But this is your traditional waterfall approach. This is one of those linear systems. You start and you say, let me think of all the possible requirements and documentation that I need for this project. Then you design something, maybe blocks modules, and then you break them down. And then you get into the implementation. Once you get done with that, you get into testing. Then once you're done with testing, you deliver or deploy. And then once it's in the field, then you have only maintenance. This is why it's called waterfall, right? Keeps coming down. All right. So one of the things is that in waterfall, strictly speaking, there is no going back. You know, this is like once you're done with this stage, you move on to the next. And I saw an interesting analog there was, you know, think of house construction. You know, you don't do roof and basement at the same time, right? You do one, you put up the walls, your foundations and walls and maybe windows, and then you put up a roof. So that this is kind of a waterfall approach. You know, one thing, linear stages that follow one right after the other. So Agile, on the other hand, is a different approach that focuses on adaptive, simultaneous workflows. And if you go to this lucid chart, that's where I copied this from. Now, this is, again, exaggeration. Of course, in the waterfall, you can have things in parallel happening. I mean, it's not like it's cast in stone, but it is, in principle, how it's supposed to work. But here's the thing. The Agile methods, you know, break project into smaller iterative periods, which work particularly well for products that benefit from user testing and regular revision. You know, if you have a well-defined project with, you know how long it takes to do certain stages because you've done it before, okay, then you can proceed with that linear methodology. You have pretty good idea what resources you need, manpower, time, you know, money, all that stuff, okay? Problem is, if you don't know many of these things, what do you do? So if you don't know, Agile approaches in general will allow you to, you know, work for a short period of time, go back and say, that assumption that we made about how long it'll take, that's going to be twice as long. Or if you're lucky, maybe it's only half what you planned. But you can go back and adjust the workflow as needed. So two methods that I just mentioned are Kanban and Scrum. Scrum is probably more popular, but these days Kanban was I think popularized by what's the car manufacturer, Japanese one, not Toshiba, but the Toyota. I think that was their stick for a while. So Kanban, in theory, is, again, emphasis is on the process improvements, whereas Scrum is concerned with getting more work done. Now, that's one of the reasons that a colleague of mine started this, we like Scrum, is because it has this very quick iterative approach, which is actually good for students because the students have to learn about things that they're doing. So as they learn, they have to go back and revise things because they now know more, so now I can do it better. So, and Scrum in particular was done for, but also by software development people. Complicated chart, don't worry about it. This is a flow chart that would, in theory, tell you how to choose which project management to choose. Forget it. The real reason you want to do Scrum is because it will let you fail in 15 days or less. Okay? And this is very important, actually, because if you think about it, how we teach our students is you make a mistake, your final is done, end of story, you fail. Okay? Done. All right? But real life, actually, failure is to be encouraged. I just heard somebody give a talk on, the Dyson guy with the vacuum cleaner. Apparently, he did 5,000 prototypes, literally. I mean, before he actually hit on that final vacuum cleaner that he, made his billions on. All right, but he failed 5,000 times. Okay, it's just like Edison. He said, I didn't fail 1,000 times, just found 1,000 times that this didn't work. Okay, so and actually, I can't find a source for this statement, but the claim is that in general, waterfall projects succeed about 11% of the time. And for agile of all kinds, maybe 39, 40%. If true, this is tremendous improvement. I mean, this is 3x, okay? So why is this necessary, you may ask? Yeah, sure, people do this in software, but here we are educating students. Why should we care about this? Well, this was implicit in ABET. ABET is American accreditation board. It used to be, yeah, anyway. One of their outcomes, student learning outcomes, is actually ability to function effectively on a team whose members together provide leadership, create a collaborative and inclusive environment, establish goals, plan tasks, meet objectives. To me, that's the definition of project management, right? I mean, it's just in other words, okay? There's other things like leadership and inclusiveness, but that's the other thing is that there's very strong evidence that active learning, and in particular collaborative learning, teamwork, working on projects, that those are, that they improve student learning, okay? And this is typically done, both active learning is more an in-class activity, but collaborative learning, we typically do it in engineering as design projects or just projects. The reason I put this in parentheses is design can mean different things to different people. There's people who do industrial design. For them, that's something different than circuit design, okay? Which is what we do, right? You say circuit design. Well, that's not what most people think of as design, as product design. So, but there's other things that kind of mixed into this. And I'll talk a little bit about scaffolding. How do we teach students so that they progress in their understanding of how to do collaborative projects? And then feedback actually is an important part of educational process or learning process in general. But Scrum does provide a kind of framework where we can use it, I think, to provide feedback. This is important because how do we provide feedback to students when they do projects? If they're lucky, they get like once a month meeting with their professor or whoever the team leader is. And then he says, yeah, this is not going well, you have to do it this way or do it that way, right? That feedback is very infrequent, and usually professor doesn't necessarily know what's going on with the project because they're not deeply involved with it. So it's hard to give feedback when you do the collaborative projects like this, okay? Until you wait till the end, which at that point feedback is no use. I mean, it's not even feedback, right? Because you can't do anything with it. So this is a list that we put together, and we said, this is why we like Scrum. And I'll try to show you how this works, but this is a much longer discussion. Rapid prototyping is one thing that comes to mind, and this has actually become very interesting, very important, I think, with the advent of makerspaces. Because now you can have students make prototypes quickly. They don't have to be 3D printed, by the way, but they can do all kinds of things that we could not do like 5 years ago, right? Quick feedback, that comes simply from the fact that you get rapid prototyping. Incremental development, what that means is instead of trying to reach that ultimate goal, we break it down into stages. You say stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and we call those sprints, just to be different. So sprint 1, 2, 3, each one of those delivers something. Now this is actually important because a lot of times it's not clear what the outcome is. What are we shooting for? This, if you've ever done like in the United States, that's called Capstone Projects in the final year. They're supposed to do a team project that is usually given by industry people or the research professors or somebody, but it's like a complicated project that requires like 1 or 2 semesters to finish. But it's not clear right away what that is about. And if you think about it, customers a lot of times don't know what they want. They'll tell you, I want this. And you come back with a prototype and say, oh, no, what I really meant is there's something else, okay? So getting that input is very important. Decentralized project management, you'll see when I explain it, the entire team is actually involved. It's not like there is one person that takes the leadership role and decides, shoo, you do everything else. And then transparency, this is the killer, okay? You'll see how, depends how it's implemented, but there is a thing called daily Scrum in Scrum meetings. And in that daily Scrum, every member is supposed to do 3 things. Say what they've done since the last meeting, if they found any obstacles, and what they're going to do next. Now, if you have a team member who day after day after day comes back and says, I didn't do anything, that becomes pretty obvious. Right? So in other words, you can't hide. That's the problem with the regular thing. Is like teams meet once a week or maybe every 2 weeks, and somebody's, I had exams, I couldn't do anything, right? What do you do? Well, you know, if you have this information early, perhaps you can do something, but that goes back to the thing that Victor was talking about, you know, how do we make everybody on that team work? So Scrum is, again, it has a long history of success in software engineering. Actually, when I gave a talk about Scrum in electrical engineering, a guy came to me afterwards and said, you know, I'm in software engineering. Once I switched to Scrum, it was like I got the best evaluations ever, you know, because that student just loved it. My experience is different. I got the worst evaluations ever, but that's okay. I think it's still worthwhile. But here's the thing. Outside of software engineering, this is not a even well-known or popular, certainly not popular method of doing things. And part of the reason I suspect is because we actually don't teach project management, period, okay? We pretend we do. That's just, okay, my take. And most of the stuff that is sold as project management, it's more like, you know, just go figure this out on your own. The same way as teamwork is taught. Actually, that's hard, but I don't want to belittle that. But anyway, I don't think we do a good job of that. What we plan is to implement Scrum, if we could, on all 4 years across, and then start freshman, sophomore, juniors are missing. You know, we could probably put that in, but not yet. I'll talk a little bit about how this is just the details of Scrum. And if you really want to find out more about Scrum, there's an online PDF file, scrumguides.org. I stole most of this information from there. So it's an open website. So if you want to understand Scrum, this is what you need to know. It's all here. Okay? What is this thing here? This is something called product backlog. So in fact, Tvrtko just gave me exactly the description of product backlog. Get a big piece of paper, put down everything that you can think of that's important or necessary or anything to do with that project, okay? Put it in a long list. Now it's your product backlog. What do you do with that product backlog? Well, it's just a list of stuff. Now you have to do next stage, which is prioritize those and then make them usable. What does that mean? Is what we do is, once you know, okay, in first sprint, that's a 2-week increment usually, we're going to demonstrate, a cardboard prototype of something. So now you figure out what do you need to make that happen. So you move all the items from there into your sprint backlog, which is a list of things that you need to do for the next 2 weeks. But it's not sufficient, just a list of things. Typically, you need 3 things. What are the 3 things? I'm going to pick on Tvrtko because he's right here. What do you need to make this into tasks instead of just things? To make, if I have something and I say I'm going to work on this, this becomes a task. What would task need to be a task?
The person responsible.
Excellent. So you need, who's the fall guy, right? Who's going to work on it? Yes.
Objectives.
What is that person going to do? Yes, I'll get to that. And
Time frame.
deadline. Time frame, yes. I mean, it's 2 weeks is the thing, but if it could be smaller chunks than those 2 weeks. Now, going back to the objective, what I like to say is these are the things, your definition of done. How do you know that this task is done? In other words, you're doing this on your own. Your team is doing something else. They want to come back and say, yeah, Tvrtko did his thing, and here's the checklist of things that he was supposed to do. That's to my mind, definition of the objective is. It's not just a description. We need to make a cardboard box. It is who's responsible, by what time, and then what is the, okay, I have to go get the paper, I have to get the cutting materials, I have to get everything, and then that means I'm done. So once you're done with that sprint backlog, typically for student teams we have 3 to 5 people on a student team, so they work on it for about 2 weeks, and this is iterative incremental development and delivery. What happens is they're supposed to meet every day. In practice, that's not going to happen unless this is the only thing they work on. Probably maybe 4 times a week, okay? But frequently, not just once a week. That's not sufficient. They meet, have their daily scrum to discuss what's going on, and what may happen is that they discovered, oh, this is much harder than I thought. So that means somebody else also gets assigned to it or is split into 2. There are things, that means I'm going back and doing a backlog refinement. I'm changing my tasks. This is why it's important to do this frequently. And this is, once the 2 weeks are done, over, then you have these 2 events. One is a sprint review, and the other one is sprint retrospective. I'll show you later. From our freshmen, I said, let's not do that because it's too much work. But one of the guys who again, software engineering instructor, came to me and said, no, keep doing that because that's important, because this is where students learn what went wrong and how they can fix it. So in sprint review, what you do is you sit down with your teammates and you say, we set out to do X, Y, and Z. What did we accomplish? Well, Y and Z, but not X. Okay? That's it. Maybe you know why. That'll be good. But the sprint so this is about what did you accomplish? This one here is more how did we go about accomplishing that? Did team work well? Did we communicate? Did those daily scrums were like a colossal waste of time, or did we put them to use? Did we exchange, documentation properly, et cetera, et cetera? This is how. And then you, at the end of this, you say, this is how we're going to improve our process. Okay? This sprint review is necessary because now you start planning next sprint. So whatever you didn't finish in this sprint, maybe you need to finish it in the next. Okay? And then, obviously, then you go back and you pull items from your backlog, and you say, okay, next sprint we are going to do a new set of items. The thing is, idea behind Scrum is that every 2 weeks you would have something that's like a deliverable, concrete thing. In software, they usually try to have some part of a piece of software that they can deliver in that time. But think of this as, say, you're building more advanced prototypes over time. So the first prototype, just tests the temperature. The next one, it has a microcontroller and some program to, turn the fan on, et cetera, et cetera. So, you can have smaller pieces of it, but deliverable. Something that you can kind of see whether your whole concept works or not. That's the whole point. Because if you wait until the whole product is done, you'll discover, gosh, this thing doesn't fit. Okay? So that's the idea behind using incremental development. I'll get back to that. Now, there are some problems. That is, Scrum team consists of 3 main figures, if you will. One is called product owner, the other one is development team, and the other one is Scrum Master. If you go back here, product owner is the guy who's responsible. This is Tvrtko, the guy who puts this list together. Okay? But he doesn't do that on just, okay, maybe that came to him, but it's usually customer, somebody paying, says, I want X. And then you translate that into some technical documentation. What do we call those things? Before we start building something. Yeah, requirements and specifications. There's all kinds of ways that people think about it, but I think requirements is like higher level, specifications more technical. So yes, so that'll all go into backlog, but you need to talk to your customer. That's what a product owner does. And then she prioritizes what goes first so it can be delivered in 2 weeks, come back, clean it up because some things you decided, not worth it, let's do it again, next 2 weeks, etc. The development team has one guy, one person, Scrum Master, who may or may not be a technical person. They are there is really just to make sure that everything runs well. Okay, that's their primary purpose. Ideally, they can do some technical work, and the way we handle it is, for now, I'm recruiting some of the seniors or graduate students to work as Scrum Masters. Okay, product owner is tricky because, say, in one current class I have is it's 15 teams. There's no way that I can be product owner for all 15. That's one problem. The other problem is actually I don't want to be product owner. The reason is because in this particular class, I want the students to design things. Okay, so what that means is they have to think about how they're going to create that backlog. How they translate, wouldn't it be nice, say one team wants to build a cheap version of speedometer and tachometer for motorcycles. Okay? I mean, first of all, I have no idea what to do about it. But second of all, one of the students actually knows all about it. So that guy should be the product owner of this. So he should be developing everything that goes into that backlog. Problem is that, strictly speaking, that should be a separate person. But, we have to make compromises. Once you get into the senior year, capstone, okay, then that's actually much easier in a way because in that case, we have somebody in our institution, we have some industrial liaison, a sponsor, who tells students, this is what I want, okay? So in a way, they act as a product owner or customer. So that role is probably the trickiest of them all because that determines what goes into your list of things that you're going to work on. In our case, at this stage, all students actually serve as effectively as product owners. So I'm not going to go through all these things, but as I say here, student teams will be doing this. This is work in progress. That if I can figure out a better way to do it, I will. But for now, that's for design projects. That's how we want to continue doing it. But you see also, even in the strict rules of Scrum, there are rules of Scrum. This can be delegated to the development team. So it's a little bit iffy. Now, this is kind of important. This is straight from their Scrum guide. Individual development team members may have specialized skills in areas of focus, but accountability belongs to the development team as a whole. So this translates to students as well. It's not like, Joe was responsible for making this hardware and he screwed up. Well, no, it's the whole team. Why? Because you should have found about that through your daily scrums and found out that Joe was having trouble and say, nope, Ann is now going to help you fix that. And then it becomes a team responsibility, not just that one person. Now, this is somewhat contrary to, again, depends what you want to accomplish with that project. But a lot of times, faculty, professors will have trouble because, we want everybody to learn everything, right? Not just soldering, not just 3D printing, not just layout, okay? But reality of life is that that's how teams work. And if you're kind of willing to let go of that requirement, then this works. If not, all projects are going to be problematic because teams will always specialize. They'll tell you, no, we're not, everybody's doing this, but that's not, I don't think it's realistic actually to impose that. So, Scrum Master actually is a critical component or team member, and right now, I thought a lot about how to do this, but right now I'm trying to recruit people from 3rd and 4th year, maybe graduate students, to serve as Scrum Masters. We pay them some small amount of money, but I think they do it just to get some practice, actually, of how to do this. Not necessarily. These are not there to provide technical support, but in reality they will, because students will run into trouble and then they'll ask, oh, do you know how to do this? And, but they're there to remove barriers for effective team functioning. Right now, teaching assistants and UAs, that's undergraduate assistants, act as Scrum Masters. Okay? But this is, again, not how it's done in real Scrum. But these Scrum Masters also are there to help me assess how well teams are doing. In other words, they are there daily, theoretically, with teams, frequently, 2-3 times a week. They know who is pulling their weight or not. So they can tell me, yeah, this team is doing fine, they're dividing their work well, they're doing everything on time, and straight A's all the way, okay? On the other hand, they can also tell me, no, this team is not working well because right? To some degree, they act as spies for me, but again, I don't particularly like that, but I'll show you one other way that we can look into what's happening in teams. And this is actually, I think, critically important. We don't have visibility into what students do on teams, okay? This is just the way it's done. We give them a task and say, sure, do your thing, come back with when you have something to show me, right? Not very effective way of doing this. And especially not when it comes to assigning blame, right? It's like, oh yeah, well, so who screwed up this time? So anyway, Scrum Masters could serve that purpose, but actually we're not relying entirely on Scrum Masters, or only on Scrum Masters. I'll show you we have another way to figure that out. So this is another reason why you want Scrum Masters. I'm not going to except maybe there's this facilitating Scrum events, and those are the Scrum retrospective, Scrum review, and then Scrum sprint planning. Those are the 3 things that Scrum Master really is critical. They have to make them do it. So that's what I was talking about. The sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective. This is kind of, I don't particularly like these labels, titles. I'm sure there's better ways to call them, but this is what they call them, okay? Somebody who is, I don't know, likes rugby and Scrum. That's, where Scrum comes from. No? It's from rugby, actually. This is when 2 teams get together and they fight over the ball, and then, you're pushing one way or the other, and then whoever gets the ball, that's the Scrum. Okay, it's meant to be like teamwork. So, how do we know that students are actually producing anything that we want? Okay, well, that comes through Scrum Artifacts. There's this product backlog, which would be a long list of things that we wish we had in that product, okay? That team is working on. And this is interesting, and I may not get it, but I'm not sure which way is the, anyway. This Gantt chart, I'll mention it later, just if don't want to run out of time. Then there is a sprint backlog, in other words, each 2 weeks, you say, what did you do these 2 weeks? There should be some trace of that has to be documented. It can't be just out of thin air. Now, what we added to this standard set of artifacts is sprint review and retrospective report. So I would like every 2 weeks, not long, I don't want 15 pages, give me 1-page summary. What did you accomplish and what did you set out to do? And what are you going to fix in terms of how you're going to do it? And actually, Trello board is something that we use, and I'll show you just a moment what that is. See, the problem is things develop during the project that we have, again, no visibility unless we ask students to do certain things and provide documentation on it, right? But anyway, I'll get to the Trello in just a moment. Artifacts, this is meant to be transparency and completeness. That doesn't make sense. Meant to be, no. The artifacts provide transparency into what's happening. Scrum Master should check all these things, and really this is actually, turns out, this part here, what is done, this is what we were talking about, what is the objective. That's the hardest thing for students to actually figure out, because this is, how, at the end of the day, you say, I finished this job. How do you know? okay? There has to be some description what done means. That's then your objective. And again, going back to the idea, look, we're not going to have our freshmen, first-year students toss into this and say, hey, do Scrum, it's real easy. Not going to work. So what we do is, we ask them, give me a list of things that you're going to work on this project. And there are small little projects, bigger projects, and all that. Don't worry about the backlog. We're just going to do it as one long sprint. It's 3 or 4 weeks long. So I don't want to go into business of prioritizing that backlog. But what you need to do is meet frequently, produce some backlog refinement. And then I said, don't worry about this. And actually, one Scrum software guy told me, hey, you really don't want to get rid of those because if students have to write retrospective, that actually helps their metacognition. They understand where things went wrong better. Not always, but hopefully. So this we will probably in some simplified way keep, but what I tell students is, look, all I want is some evidence of planning, right? Because if you give students projects, what happens is nothing happens for like 3 weeks, and then the 4th week, 1 week before the deadline, they all get together, it's like, we need this, we need that, and it's like you get together at somebody's house, and then, here you go, We want to avoid that, okay? So show me that you actually planned this. And how do you show that? Well, just a moment. But this is the first stage, and then we keep adding some of these things. For example, there are things in here that are not listed that we don't require from students on a 2nd year level. But then Capstone level students should be able to do the whole thing, proper Scrum, we hope. And this is another one line for you. Scrum is easy to explain, but difficult or hard to do. I think, I just finished the class where we actually practiced this Scrum. And there was a 2-week sprint, single sprint. I gave everything to the students. And all I said is like, think about how you're going to break this up into chunks so that each one of you does it. And there was actually a whole description of it on the web. All you have to do is maybe modify the code a little bit. I just want to see this thing working, okay? So what did students complain about? It was too easy, okay? So you don't get this too often. But so the problem was, we didn't know how to break this down into smaller pieces. Because to them, it was like hardware, software, done. Like, no. You can break it down, but clearly they can't kind of take that next step and break it down into smaller tasks, okay? They still think a little bit too big for my liking, okay? So, but Scrum in theory should offer this visibility. I call it sausage making. In other words, how do students actually do it? And Scrum Master may provide one way to do it, but the other one is if we had something called Kanban board. This is a sticky board, those little things that you put on your whiteboard. And then typically these things will have backlog, in progress, review, test, that variety of labels are employed. Problem is, we started, actually this is how I first found out about Scrum. I was walking by my colleague's lab and I saw them moving these stickies around, like, gosh, what are they doing, So I went inside and that's what they were doing. They were cleaning the backlog and moving things to done and all this. Like, this looks interesting. Problem is if I have 15 teams, I don't have 15 boards to put up. Plus we would have another 2 or 3 classes. I don't have 30 boards to put it up. So we need a software solution. And that's this thing called Trello. And if you look at, this is basically, I give them a template, just follow this. You guys look like you're familiar with the Trello? Yes? Okay, where do you use it? For projects? Thumbs up, there you go. But, so it is basically a Kanban board, right? Just the stickies, what they call them cards and lists and all that stuff. But basically I just tell them, look, here's the backlog, list all the things. Then actually in here we would now add the sprint a backlog because that will be transferred from here to here. What is ready? Ready are only those tasks that you listed, the 3 things that we talked about. Who's going to do it, by when, and how do you know it's done? Okay, that's ready. Somebody can do this. Okay, and then in progress, somebody's actually working on it. And then before moving it to done, I tell students, look, okay, it's up to you, but I would recommend that you have somebody else look at what you've done, so that you can safely say, yep, this is done. Move it over to done column. Okay. And there are 2 additional ones that's for documentation only. Journalists, I tell them to keep notes of any big decisions that they make along the way, either sprint reviews or daily scrums when they have to change something, or comments is where I post my feedback on their Trello board in particular. I say, look, this, you didn't move things, or it's not poorly organized, or you're not using some stuff. Okay. Let's see if I forgot anything here. So the really cool thing about Trello is now it becomes visible what students are doing, so long as they're moving the cards and adding the stuff. But if they aren't, I'll catch them and I'll tell them, look, this is not acceptable, all right? You have to put on stuff. Or I can see who's doing the work, because it gives me a list, you guys know, right? Who's done this stuff, okay? There's no hiding, right? So actually we have rubrics. I'll show you. That's the one. This may look, again, familiar. This is one of the cards if you blow it up. So what you have is who is responsible. That's the red stuff. What's the due date up there, deadline. Checklist is my preferred way of telling students, how do you know this is done? Because most tasks, you have several intermediate steps that you need to do before you can say, yep, I'm done, right? Okay? And if you think about it, usually there's at least 2 or 3, but usually there's more than that. And then that's the what, and then comments and suggestions. That's if their teammates have something to say. There you go. It's pretty, this thing is actually much more complicated than this. There's many other features that you can add, and colors and things, but this is the basic stuff. And this is what I tell students. Here's what I'm going to look for when it comes to Trello alone, not so much Scrum. How is it organized? Are there appropriate lists? Are they moved along? Are you following suggested organization? You can have your own, but it has to make sense. You can't just do this willy-nilly. What is the, are they prioritized, those lists? That actually doesn't happen very often. Students are very kind of fuzzy about that one. They just leave it any which way. Content and quality, are they clear and concise? Are they clear description of tasks? Degree of activity, is everybody participating? They will usually assign somebody who does this, but I tell them, that's fine, but if you're responsible for that task, I can't imagine that somebody else is going to move that for you, okay? You have to move it. So there's got to be at least some activity from everybody. So there's just some details on how to do that. This is actually a freshman thing. We asked them to develop a security system for a house, obviously a model. But so this may be what it looks like. Now, if you pay attention, then you probably noticed that Trello keeps track of things, but eventually everything gets into the done column. So if you want to see how this develops, you have to take snapshots. So that's what I tell Scrum Masters every 2 weeks when you meet. Take a snapshot of that Trello board so that I know actually, or what was on it then. Because once they move it all, who's going to go back to find out what they did 2 weeks ago, right? So you need to keep track of that. But anyway, so this is one. In this case, they had a lot of photos and stuff, and you can color code this. You can have fun with some of these things. What we are still lacking is how to assess Scrum itself. But as far as I can tell, assessing project management is anybody's guess, okay? I talk to people who do this for a living, but they give me these complicated, convoluted things to look at, work, something, there's I'm like, no, that's too complicated. But I think one of the things that I think would be helpful is, do they participate in daily scrums? Do they have what I call thoughtful approach to sprints, reviews, and retrospectives? In other words, it's not just a mechanical thing, they just repeat every time the same thing. Quality review and retrospective reports, that may be, again, a measure of how well they're doing their project management, equitable division of labor. I'm open to suggestions. What would you consider good project management measures, metrics? Again, with the idea that now we can actually look inside the process, not just wait until they write the report, okay, which is most of the time what we do. It's like, yeah, write a chapter on how you did project management. They're not going to tell you how they did it actually, right? So, and speaking of teamwork, this is going to Victor's question about, how do we make everybody work? Well, that's one of the things that has to be. I was just engaged in email exchange with a colleague who does a course on product design, and he's very disillusioned with teamwork. He thinks it's a colossal waste of time. But I think from educational perspective, from pedagogy and all we know, learning is a social activity, and therefore, if done right, I believe projects and collaborative learning is the way to go. But the one way that I try to get students to think about how to make their teams work properly is to write these team contracts. But I haven't seen any really evidence that they actually work. I mean, I have to look into the literature, and if anybody knows about it, tell me. There's a belief that they work, but I don't know that for a fact, okay? We will also try to use Scrum Masters to evaluate how well those teams work, but I don't have rubrics for that yet. That's hard. I still don't know how. In other words, the rubrics I showed you are rubrics are strictly for Trello, not necessarily project management per se. That'll be how well they've done the Trello boards. And that's harder. I don't know if you're familiar with CATME system. That's just a way of what's called peer evaluation of teamwork. So in other words, your teammates get to evaluate you, and you evaluate yourself, and then you can, see how everything. Did the team divide, for example, tasks appropriately? Did the other person pay attention? I mean, I forget the questions, but anyway, there's about a half dozen or so questions that students have to respond to. Now, the nice thing about CATME, I have to say, is those of you who are into evaluation and assessment, is that something called validated and reliable tool. In other words, somebody went through trouble to establish that this is actually measuring what it's supposed to, and A, and B, that it is reliably measuring what it's supposed to, okay? Which is not true if you come up with your own way of doing this thing. It may not be true for either one of those. Now, the other thing is team members may need some instruction on how to use CATME effectively. We're still not doing, I think, a very good job of that. But anyway, if you want to, just search for CATME. They've got some stuff on internet. Now, these days, you have to produce some data to verify things, but this is one of those data that it's in the eye of the beholder. I'm not sure how useful it is, but this is a freshman course, and we asked them how helpful was this activity and learning material in this course. In other words, how helpful was using Trello for projects? Okay, and if you look at this, what I can tell you is when we ask similar questions about other things, things look better. Hardly anybody says, oh no, this was not helpful. Okay, here they do. Okay, most of them will be somewhat helpful or neutral or whatever. So there's work to be done, and I tell you why I think students have this perception, because it makes them do things that they don't normally do, which is plan. Okay? I mean, I'm in the same category. I don't do this well, okay? So I know the drudgery of having to come up with these plans, okay? You have to do this, right? And then they don't see the immediate benefit of it. Just, oh, Brana told them to do so, you know. Yeah, very useful. So they don't, I think, like doing that, and therefore they think it's not very helpful. Personal opinion. Okay, I don't have any other evidence. Now, on the other hand, if you ask them, how confident are you that I can define and implement a project management plan? Now remember, that's the distribution over there. Is this helpful? Basically, everybody agrees. Okay, the blue ones, that's the freshman. The orange or red thing, sophomore, second year. So this is first year. They're a little bit less sure. Okay, yeah, I can believe that. Once they get into the second year, I think they're a little bit too sure of their abilities in that regard. Okay. Why? How do I know? Because I look at their Trello boards. I can see, you know, where was that planning on that Trello board? Oh, we forgot. You know, we planned it, but we just forgot to put it on Trello board. You know, that's not a good project management, right? You have to keep track of what you've done and when and how. So anyway, but this is the best we can do right now is, you know, they seem to agree that they can do project management. Where they learned it, I have no idea, because the only time we have is those 2 courses on the first year. Maybe they learned it there, I doubt it, but anyway. Now in the third year, we don't have anything, and in the fourth year, only a subset of our teams actually work on using Scrum. Why? Because we let them choose, okay? And not everybody actually learns how to use Scrum. It's a long story. It has to do with the fact that like 2/3 of our students are transfer students who do not go through our first 2 years, which is when we teach them Scrum. But anyway, some that do, they generally seem to have an upward trend going from sprint 1, 2, 3, 4 in the various metrics of team effectiveness, you know, the team satisfaction, goals, strategy formulation, mission analysis. Those are, that makes sense at the capstone level at this senior year, but not for freshmen, right? You know, I'm not going to ask them this level of detail. So we think it's fairly successful so far. I have to tell you, in my first trial on the second year was not so good, but they're just getting into projects right now. So we'll see how the projects go. But the preparation was a little bit too complicated. So this is not a slam dunk. If you're going to do this, you have to kind of maybe learn from my mistakes. I'd be happy to share them. Okay. So what are the problems and issues? We've got some roles that are difficult to define. You know, they may depend on the project, students' experience, support. Not everybody can get these Scrum Masters. If you can't get Scrum Masters from your upperclassmen, you have to find some other way to do it. Maybe students will have to do it themselves. There's assessment is a problem, but we're making some progress. Making students practice project management is difficult. You know, literature says that practicing teamwork is good for you. Nobody tells you how to do it, okay? Not in engineering. Well, I'm exaggerating. There are things, but we need to pay attention. Choice of project is tricky. In other words, it can't be too hard, it can't be too easy. If it's too easy, students complain that they can't break it down into sufficiently complicated parts. If it's too difficult, they can't do it, okay? So how do you train them? Well, you find that, you know, just one project that just meets all the requirements. I don't know how to assess this. That's still a problem. Students are confident in their project management skills, but I have to see better evidence of that. Let's put it that way. So conclusion, I think there are good reasons to at least try something like Scrum, project management engineering, and in particular design projects. This is what it's meant for, the project. Students are confident, but you know, maybe overly so. Proper training is still an open question. This is not an either-or situation. We're never going to be able to do pure Scrum, whatever that is. I mean, there is the Scrum guide says, thou shalt do this, and do it this way, and da, da, da. We can't do it. It's just the environment is different, okay? So if there are ways that we can make it better, and this is where my Gantt chart story comes in, because we were doing this, And I was telling students, do this on Trello and do da 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 da. And then one team, before they went into Trello, they set up a Gantt chart. I'm like, gosh, you know, should I tell them not to do this? And I'm thinking, well, no, of course they should do some overall planning before they start thinking about what to do for the next 2 weeks, right? Then it turns out, guess what? On Google Docs, there is a template for Gantt chart. When you click on it, and it's just like poof, right there. So you can easily actually do overall planning for the whole project. And then based on that, 2 weeks chunk here, 2 weeks chunk there, and da-da-da, right? Get done. So that goes back to this, we don't have to be purist about it. We can make it work. And the really question is, why not give something like this a try? And, see how it goes. I don't think, again, I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to try it out. But if you have any questions right now, I'd be happy to answer them too.
Thank you. Questions?
Surely Trello users have something to say. It doesn't have to be a question. You can say, I would like to know how your experience with Trello worked out. Was it good, ugly? It was like we didn't know what to do. It depends on the team member, right?
Very much. Some are like very hard to adapt to that kind of technology.
I see.
And others that are like, okay.
Yeah, so,
Everybody has their preferences.
Yeah, I know. How did that work for you?
Well, I'm the hard guy.
Oh, the hard guy, it doesn't work for you, huh? Okay. Well, so which part of it? Is it planning or just having to keep track of things? Or
Probably keeping track of things. Sometimes after I finish with work, I just simply forget to update the chart, and then after when I check the things I have to do, it's still there. So
right. Yeah, so, all I can say there is, I'm the same way. I'm happy that I finished it, right? And it's like, who wants to go there and check off all those things? But the thing is that your teammates need to know, right? Because next time you meet, you have to decide, where are we? And if they don't have a good idea, it could be a problem. And that's why those daily scrums are actually helpful. And this is where people should say, hey, you didn't update your thing here. Okay, that's good.
How many students did you have in your evaluation?
So the last one, the second year one that we just finished, that was some 60, 65. In 101, I want to say probably 45, 50. In there I had 5-person teams, and here I had 4. So it was, I think, more like 10 or 11 teams in one and about 15, 16 in another. It's more than I wanted to have, but this is the first time we were running it. So anyway, long story. I wanted to have about 10 to 12 momentum.
Did you read about something similar in conference, I guess, articles or
So
papers?
when I did this about 2 years ago, I didn't search literature again. The only thing I can find is computer science, or actually not even computer science, software engineering guys. I believe somebody, I could not find that paper, somebody in software engineering, guys here at FERT, published something about using Scrum. I could swear, I just couldn't find that paper. It's mostly software engineering, okay? There are some published works on how to use Scrum on senior level for those capstone projects. But my problem with that is, if you start telling students how to do this in their 4th year, you wasted 3 years. Because it's not a given that they'll know how to do this. I mean, again, what do we do for teamwork? Is there like a course or something? I mean, it shouldn't be a course, by the way, because we like to break everything up into, course for this and course for project management. No, I mean, this should be integrated. That's the only way it makes sense. So literature is sparse. There is a lot, that was in mechatronics. I remember one paper on Capstone. Few. I don't know, I mean, most people think that hardware is inherently different than software. And my take on that is maybe it was before, but now we can make hardware quickly. PC board used to be like send the thing and wait a month until it comes back. You go down in the lab and you can get it done in a day or two. Layout was a problem because there were like 1,000 different formats. Now it's like, open up your Eagle and something. Once you learn how to do it, easy. You need an enclosure, fire up a 3D printer. I mean, you can prototype simple thing in a matter of weeks, right? Well, that fits into Scrum. And it actually encourages, I was looking at some students' plans for next term because they were supposed to plan what they're going to do next term. They all say, well, we are going to research first, and then we are going to do some simulations, and then we are going to do this, and then we are going to build it, and then we are going to test it. I'm like, by that, if anything does not work at that point, there's no way that you're going to fix it, right? Because that's like a week before the deadline. So you need to have prototypes earlier. And that's, I think, what we discourage students from doing, failing early. Because, they have to, they'll fail for sure. I fail all the time, right? So, you fail early, but then you go around and say, why did this not work? Too big, too small, too fast? Okay, let's fix it. Next iteration. It's still ugly, but better, all right? Move on. So I think, there's general tendency not to prototype. And by the way, this may be for students, how many times do you actually sketch your things before you do them? Probably never.
Lately, very often.
Yes, what do you do?
Oh, well, we do all such kind of stuff, like mostly our embedded projects, small embedded projects.
Small embedded?
Like
See, yeah.
IoT projects.
Excellent. That's what that.
So mostly it's on prototyping, because we learned from experience that everything that, doing something right before the deadline is not
Not a good strategy, huh? Well, so there you go. In general, I find students don't want to sketch things. I have to make them sketch it, and that's a prototype in a way, so that's your 0 level prototype. So anyway, I think to answer your question is I don't know, but it seems to be still novelty. Maybe it'll catch on, maybe not. There's problems. Logistically, this is not an easiest thing to do. But on the other hand, the alternative to this mostly is like, well, we pretend that they learned this on their own, right? If somebody can tell me how to do this better using a different method, I'm all ears. And actually now Capstone, to be honest, this is not always the best way to do it, because some people like Intel will come back and they will say, this is what I need, here's the technical specs, I need this delivered in 15 weeks. Okay, go. In that case, there's not much flexibility. But one project that I keep remembering is, we had a guy, one of our former students, come and said, I want this team to build something called Parrot, which is a part of a distillery for whiskey and alcohols. This is where you measure alcohol content, right? But it was done, it's like medieval ways. It's like by hand, and you put a blob in there, and then see, okay. So he just wanted to digitize this thing. But he actually didn't know how to do this. Along the way, we found that it has to be made out of steel. Okay, well, we can't do that. So he had to do it. Then we found out, explosion is the biggest thing, that you have to worry about. Then it turned out that, IoT, before the days of these latest microcontrollers, was hard to do because you wanted everything on the internet, et cetera, right? So we started from, okay, I want this, to actual specifications at the very end. This is what we can deliver. End of story, okay? So, and that was perfect for this. I didn't know about Scrum at the time. Well, we just started it. But anyway, it would be, that type of project would really fit. Some of the other ones that I was involved in, doesn't fit. So it has to be a little, judiciously approached. I'm glad that you guys are doing IoT. Maybe we'll talk. Anything else?
If not,
Okay.
once again.
Thank you.